Courtney Cowie, functional nutrition. What do you know about it? I've had the great opportunity to talk to uh, several functional nutrition practitioners. I love this. I love what's happening. The very first question I asked Courtney is, where does traditional kind of Western medicine that we see here in the States leave off, where functional nutrition takes over? Gut health and reaction to foods and IBS and celiac and things like this. There's plenty of drugs to kind of treat the symptoms, but how do we actually cure it? Diagnosis, she used a term I never heard before of diagnosis of exclusion, excuse me, where, you go and they're trying to figure out what you have and you have tests and they say, well, it's not this, not this, not this, and try to figure it out. But just how it works and helps. As a child, she had severe stomach issues. As an athlete, younger brothers who curled up to the couch and eventually would go away. And later she found herself in Japan where she studied and trained, and she's getting her more of an education there, and was introduced to Chinese medicine, and later brought it into her regular health. And now she turns it around and helps others. But what do you know about functional nutrition? How can it help you? It can greatly. We talk about testing, we talk about supplements, nutrition. Just a great conversation with Courtney, really knowledgeable, great passion. And what drives her and how she looks at discipline is very interesting as well. Thanks for listening and watching. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz, and here's my 45-second introduction. After starting my business in the 90s, I started developing poor habits of eating in my diet because of working way too much. Before you know it, I found myself 340 pounds. The doctor told me if I don't lose the weight, I'm not going to see my daughter graduate. Took the next 7 months, lost 130 pounds. People think there's some secret. Ask me, how'd you lose that weight? Like there's some secret. There is no secret. How'd I lose the weight? Just one word: discipline. I've had other successes in life, and I attribute them all to discipline. Now, I'm not the king of discipline, but I believe that it can help all of us. Friends, colleagues convinced me to start a podcast. The podcast mission: how do we better ourselves and society? I talk to interesting people in health, fitness, sport, wellness, business, technology, science, art, and culture. And I eventually ask them how discipline plays a role in their life. Podcast vision: growth through learning from others. A while ago, Courtney Cowie, I'm very excited to talk to you. Where does kind of traditional Western medicine leave off, where, functional nutritional medicine takes over?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So again, this is kind of coming from my experience and
Of
background,
course.
but I feel like Western medicine is really great for emergency, life-threatening, major surgeries, that type of thing, right? Like the types of issues that come up in modern world because of like major car accidents or let's say things like cancer, right? Like um, there's a time and place where we need to have those tools to address those challenges, but where it can be really frustrating if you're struggling with a chronic condition like an inflammatory condition like something autoimmune, or say IBS, which is kind of like the area of folks I work with and then I personally experience. They don't have a lot of tools to get to the root cause, and so you're
Mm.
basically going to be put through this process of doing a bunch of diagnostic testing. Sometimes things come back abnormal. Typically if it's inflammatory, it's going to be some sort of autoimmune diagnosis if you meet that criteria. In the IBS camp, it's kind of like this diagnosis of exclusion. So you have the
Mm.
symptoms but they can't find anything wrong, and then normally the next step is to offer like drugs for symptom control with gut issues like IBS and IBD. They might suggest things like probiotics and fiber. Um, Typically, none of these things work super well. And if the drugs do work to a point, there can also be these side effects that are pretty awful that people don't like to deal with.
Hmm.
So, and I think kind of where we're getting culturally is a lot more people are really starting to question, do I want to take a drug to just band aid my symptoms, or do I really want to understand why my body is doing this, right? Because
Mm.
in functional medicine, we always believe that there's a reason why the body is expressing these symptoms. There's some sort of inherent self-corrective mechanism the body is trying to establish in any type of symptom, right? And so, although it's really bothersome and frustrating as a patient or client going through this, like we're looking to get at, okay, can we discover what these deeper stressors are that are contributing to the symptoms, whether they're lifestyle, dietary, hidden gut bugs, that type of thing, and work on removing those and also give the body the supports it needs to heal naturally. So we definitely come at this idea that the body knows how to self heal in the
Mm.
right conditions. It's kind of how functional medicine works philosophically, right?
Do you want to connect with business leaders and engage consumers who take action? The Joey Pinz podcast delivers high impact conversations to an audience of decision makers, entrepreneurs, and professionals across multiple industries. A fast growing audience of highly engaged listeners, both B2B and B2C. Millions of listens and views across YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Brands that sponsor us see real engagement, conversations, and brand loyalty. Whether you're looking to sell a service, promote a product, or establish thought leadership, our sponsorships offer premium ad placements, exclusive episode sponsorships, full season branding, and event partnerships. Don't just advertise, become part of the conversation. Visit us at joeypins.com/sponsor to get started, or email us at sales@joeypins.com. Joey Pins Podcast, where thought leaders, brands connect. Diagnosis of exclusion. So we've all been there, right? We feel something, we go to the doctor and they start taking tests. Well, it's not this, it's not this, it's not. Yeah, I've never heard it quite explained that way, but it's very true.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like IBS, chronic fatigue, and fibromyalgia are kind of the classic three that fall into that category
Mm,
where people are feeling really unwell and they're having all kinds of symptoms, but they're not meeting the standard diagnostic criteria to like sort of for a doctor to point their finger at it and be like, it's this, right? Like
mm.
there's nothing they can really say definitively is causing it, right?
Now, your exposure to this, you were in Japan for about 3 years, I understand, getting your degree. And so you got exposed to kind of Chinese medicine.
Yeah.
Then you came back and things happened, some stress levels increased in your life. So you kind of fell back into it and kind of dove deep into it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I have always had an interest in like different cultures, different people, all the way back to childhood. Like my family hosted French kids when I was like in
Wow.
elementary and junior high school. So kind of just a little factoid there, but loved that experience and actually studied French language all the way through college. And then I was sitting in an engineering class as like a junior in college, and I my original degree actually was in engineering, if you can believe that.
Hmm.
And the study abroad lady came in and she said, we have some really amazing exchange programs, especially with countries like Japan that aren't typically the most popular countries for students to go to. But I myself studied over there. I had an amazing experience. Like, please come see me if this interests you. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, Japan, I've never really thought about that, but like,
Hmm.
that sounds interesting. Maybe I'll go talk to her about that. And then next thing you know, I'm going down that path, right? And
Wow.
so I ended up going abroad for a year as an undergraduate. It was amazing. I loved it even more than my experiences working abroad in Belgium and studying French language over there. And so that kind of influenced me to go down this path then, where I went back to graduate school to study Japan and get a degree in Japan studies. So I was back and forth quite a bit throughout my 20s. And it was kind of just incidentally, as I was on that journey, I was having more and more issues with my own health, both GI symptoms as well as just weird things. Like I was, trying to work a part time job. It was very late hours. I had never done that before. And after I had started that job about 2, 3 weeks in, I remember getting up at like noon, which was not the norm for me, but I had to because of the shifted work. And I just passed out, and it kind of scared me. So
Wow.
I remember reaching out to my Japanese friend and she's like, there's a Chinese herbalist that I see. I think you should really go see her and I'll go with you. And I was pretty open minded, obviously having interest in studying abroad. I was pretty game to try, things that seemed like they would work. Right. And so went with her and it was a really fascinating experience. Just the whole process of her, assessing me was so different than going to a doctor in the States. I mean, she wanted to actually like touch my wrist and feel my pulse. And she had me
Hmm.
stick my tongue out and look at my tongue. And, she took her thumb and she pressed into the shin bone on one of my legs to see if it would like the skin would bounce back easily or if there was like edema. Right. And I was just fascinated. And I was like, how does she know to do all this stuff? This is crazy. And she'd ask me questions as she was going through this. And I would answer, but it was like she knew the answer before I said it. So I just thought this is like such an intuitive interesting, fascinating way of gathering information. And she seems like she's really getting a handle on things. Like, I want to learn more. And then she sent me out the door with some herbal formulas. And within a matter of weeks, I was seeing a lot of improvement. So I think at that point, I was really hooked and I was like, I got to know more about this. This is amazing. So, yeah, that definitely set me on the path of getting interested in. Initially, it was Chinese medicine. And my first kind of degree, if you will, in the holistic health field was as a Chinese medicine trained licensed bodywork therapist. So, massage therapy using Chinese medicine acupressure framework to kind of help people with pain relief. And then from there, I actually got into nutrition and functional medicine. So, yeah,
And as a kid, I believe you had younger brothers, but you still, you were an athlete, but you still had stomach issues, and you just kind of
yeah,
accepted it. You'd have to sit on the couch for a half hour, let it kind of fade away, but
yeah.
you just thought it was typical and just kind of accepted it. But later, you learned that this is one not acceptable, and you assumed you figured out you had some gut issues.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's just it. It was kind of all always there thinking back, now that I've come full circle and I've really become knowledgeable in this area, I see that that was not normal. But yeah, for as far back as I can remember, I would say even as far back as third, fourth grade, I was having pretty regular stomach aches. Like they would happen during sporting events, like I was a soccer player, and then later I got into swim team. Most summers, my family would travel because my mom worked a school year calendar, so she was off in the summers, and she would plan family vacations. And I remember like driving. We do a lot of just because there were six of us, we'd get in like the minivan and drive across the country, and we'd be places and like my parents would tell me, look, you can't have a stomach ache right now. We're like out going to blah, blah, blah place, and like as if I could control this, right? Like as if I could time it. But it was happening frequently enough.
Mm.
And I think they sort of saw it as a bit of an annoyance and a nuisance. But because I could bounce back from it pretty quickly, normally as a kid, what I would do is lay down and put some pressure on my stomach with like a pillow and it would go away within about 30 minutes and I'd be okay again. I don't
Mm.
think they ever thought it was anything serious. I think they just thought it was some psychosomatic thing particular to me. And what's interesting
Hmm.
about this is come full circle, later on as an adult, some of the self testing I did revealed that, I carry like the perfect genetic combo for celiac disease, right? So, as a kid growing up, like that just wasn't widely tested for, not even in, I don't think they ever took me to a GI doc, but like most Americans, like we were eating wheat bread pretty much every day of the week and in
Mm.
our household growing up. So yeah, just had no idea. And I think this really did set the stage for some foundational weaknesses that as other factors came in when I became an adult, it just really snowballed into major issues.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about that moment that you finally, made the pivot to functional medicine because, like you said, you had these issues.
Yeah.
You saw the Chinese doctor. There was some large stress in your life. You became a single mom, and the big stress happened in your life. So, when was the final? Okay, this is what I'm going to submit to. This is going to be the path that I'm going to go. Not only am I going to help myself, but I'm going to try to help others. What was that pivot point,
Yeah, I
Courtney?
think I think it was a couple of things predominantly. So, um, probably about 3 or 4 years after I had my first colonoscopy, I had a major gut breakdown, and for me, it was, IBS-D presentation, like lots of bowel movements, urgency, running to the bathroom, and it typically in the past, I'd have that for a few weeks and it would normalize. Well, this did not normalize, and so that really scared me first and foremost, right? Like I had never been that consistently off kilter. And so and I had already seen a number of GI docs, and I was already kind of at that point where I thought, I just don't think these people are going to help me. And
Wow.
so I think it was two things. I went in to see the GI doc I was seeing at the time, and believe it or not, she actually got very frustrated when I came in to see her. And I said, I'm really struggling. I'm having a lot of loose stool, bowel movements. Is there something else we can do? And I think she had done a full workup and I'd seen her so many times. She just kind of got frustrated. She's like, I don't know what to tell you. This is IBSD, and I think you need to go see a dietitian. And I was a little bit shocked because I was like, well, I'm already experimenting with my diet and reading a lot of books on this. Like, I don't think my diet is that bad. I didn't tell her that though. I felt really written off kind of at that point and almost like ashamed and angry leaving the office because it was almost like she was suggesting I was some crazy person,
Wow.
coming in again with these symptoms. And I think really what was probably going on is she was just very frustrated not having any other tools to really try to help me figure this out. And so I left, and I think I had the sense of like, not doing that again, firing that doctor. I don't know if
Hmm.
I want to go see a new GI doc now. Maybe we go a different direction. And then I ended up going, my first kind of like foray into functional medicine was I went to a local, uh, it was basically like a nutrition practice, if you will, that had one main nutritionist and several kind of understudies working with her. And the main premise of that practice was to do a food sensitivity test called the LCAT. And this is kind of a nuanced topic. I'm not entirely against food sensitivity testing, but in my personal experience and what I've seen in my work with clients, I don't think it's necessarily the critical tool to get the answers you need to help people.
Hmm.
And so,
Hmm.
but to me, it made sense like as a good starting point. So I ran that food sensitivity test. Of course, a ton of foods came back showing, my body is having reactions, and their methodology: eliminate all of those foods on that list for 90 days. And then we're going to come back in and see how you're doing. And so I did that, and I did it to a T, and I had like very, very little symptom improvement.
Hmm.
And so when I went back in, I remember meeting with the nutrition counselor, and I think she was a little bit like boggled. She's like, I don't understand this either. Typically, when we do this with people, they get better, at least substantially better, and you're not reporting any symptom improvement. Like, this is really weird. And I think, again, we hit a wall. And it was at that point I was already subscribed to a number of different functional medicine newsletters, following these people, starting to kind of get educated a little bit anyhow on my own. And I think after that second frustration, I was like, you know what, this is crazy. Like, if they can't help me figure this out, and I'm hitting a wall here, and I've already experienced the GI side of things with the GI docs, and that got me nowhere, I'm going to figure this out myself. I really
Hmm.
think it was kind of that combination of things. And then the extra little motivation at that time too was that I was already a few years deep into my bodywork practice, and I was seeing clients personally, and people would come in and talk about these other health conditions they had, beyond just the body pain they were coming to see me for. And so I could really see this becoming another facet of working with people that would really, fuel that passion I had to help people improve their health. And so there was for sure the personal investment, but then there was also this like real utility in getting that knowledge to just serve my clients at a deeper level.
What is the body work? Tell me about that, Courtney.
Yeah. So I use the term body work because it's not everybody out there is familiar with massage therapy. That's I'd say most people have heard of that term,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
But everybody's got different ideas of what that is, and so when I talk to people about being a massage therapist or licensed bodywork therapist, sometimes people are like, "Oh, that you must be, put people to sleep and relax them so much," right? Like, there's this idea that sometimes it's like going to a spa and you just lay there and it's this very soft, gentle, relaxing. And there is that, right? Like, that is a form of it and it has a place. But the work I do, I would say, is more purposeful. Like, I would say it's not the kind of frou-frou, make people feel relaxed type of work. It's literally kind of getting in there and helping people resolve these very specific pain issues they've got going on. So it's a little bit more
Hmm.
focused, intensive, if you will. It's using tools like acupressure. I work with fire cupping, which is a tool that is part of Chinese medicine, right? Like, acupuncturists are also trained to do it as well. And just over the time I've been doing this, all of those things in combination, I find get really, really good results for people. But, you know, um, in that practice, I've gotten a lot of word of mouth clients that have come in the door, and they kind of know what they're signing up for. But, when I'm out talking to regular people, I have to be very specific about how I describe it. And I use body work because it kind of gets people, I think, a little bit to say, like, I don't really know what that is. Like, tell me, right? Because if you say
Hmm.
massage, my worry or my fear is they're going to think it's like a spa setting, which it's
Right.
not at all. It's very much focused on kind of correcting these pain issues that people have.
So, Courtney, knowing what you know now, if you were to go back and, when you started having these symptoms, what would you have done? What should you have done?
What should I have done? Like, even all the way back as far as childhood, yes?
Yes.
Yeah. I think the first thing I would have done is gotten wheat completely out of my diet. Like, I think that was a big foundational weakness. It's something I was exposed to for, gosh, absolutely the first several decades of my life. Like,
Mm,
I mean, I don't remember how old I was when I decided and understood I needed to go 100% wheat free, but for sure I was at least 30 something, right? So you have that much time of ongoing wheat exposure. And, just for the listening audience, this might be something people don't understand. There is a very strong genetic correlation with celiac disease. So there's two predominant genotypes that you can carry that account for upwards of like 99% of celiac disease. One combination kind of predominates over the other, and that one combination is like 90% of celiac disease. That's the one that I carry. And
hmm.
so I think if my family had known all of this as a child, probably not likely I would know it, but if I could go back in time and parent myself as a child, right, like I would have gotten wheat out of the household as a starting point. And I think right there, that would have done quite a bit.
Hmm.
I think just like all chronic illness, there absolutely were emotional, factors, blockages in the body, probably thinking patterns that again go back to the family culture that I grew up in, right? Like this kind of gets into that whole esoteric like wormhole of little t trauma and attachment, issues and negative thought patterns that we inherit generation after generation, right? Like just through life experience. And then these experiences kind of live in our parents and our grandparents, and then they kind of get modeled and passed down. And so many of us honestly have this, whether we realize it or not. And, that's been another facet of study that I've gotten into because I've just seen time and time again that that always coexists with chronic illness. And so if you go all the way back to childhood and you're already seeing a child with chronic symptoms, whether they're GI or something else, guaranteed there's an emotional energetic component to it. There's some sort of block in the body. It goes back to some sort of experience or experiences that the body hasn't fully processed on the emotional level, and that's also playing out and inhibiting good physical function. So I do think that's another piece of it. And honestly, as an adult, I'm still trying to kind of figure that part out, right? Like that's probably the
Wow.
hardest part of chronic illness is just going back and trying to figure out, okay, on that level, what is still there that needs to be resolved, right?
Courtney, is there any truth to the, here in the States, what they do to the wheat with the phosphates and the folic acid versus what they do in Europe, let's say,
Yeah.
for example, is so different that perhaps that's part of the problem? Maybe if you were exposed to wheat that wasn't exposed to all these kind of additives that maybe wouldn't be so pronounced, your symptoms?
Yeah, I do agree with that. I definitely do. Wheat is heavily sprayed with glyphosate, right, which is Roundup.
Glyphosates, yes.
Yep. And then on top of that, so much of the grain that's grown in the US is also GMO, so you have
Yes.
to kind of wonder like this isn't food that the human body has been consuming
Right.
for hundreds of years. And so, just as a nutritionist, like my original training is really rooted in trying to go back to the way our ancestors ate, right? Like ancestral diets where it's whole foods, recognizable foods, something that, your great 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 grandmother hundreds of years ago would have
Mhm.
recognized as a
Mm.
food. And so I do believe that's a big piece of it. And it's really hard to kind of separate out how much is it, the form of the wheat as it's evolved over time and become more of a like I don't know, GMO grain, if you will, right? And how much of it is the spraying of the chemicals, and then how much of it is just that some people genetically are more susceptible to developing inflammation and leaky gut when they're exposed to wheat.
Mm.
Certainly, I have the genetic component for that, but I do think that those other factors drive a lot of leaky gut and inflammation in the majority of the population. And then it's kind of like Russian roulette, like depending on
Mm.
your genetic potential. If you've got other stressors that come in, that could be a factor that sets off chronic illness, right?
Yeah, it is something that we have to adapt as Americans because it's not just these whole foods anymore. It's
Right.
all genetically modified, right?
Exactly.
And so it's very tough to figure out what the actual culprit is. So if somebody's having these gut issues like you're talking about, and
Mhm.
it's this process of exclusion. Oh my goodness, that just aggravates me. I'd never quite heard that expression before, but that's what they do. So what should someone do to check their gut health?
Yeah, well, the best thing in my world is taking a specialized stool test, right? We call this a functional stool test. And one of the biggest misnomers the average person has about this is it's they think it's the same testing their GI doc will do, and it's
Right.
totally not, right? Like it's a very different type of test. Technology is very different. The technology is a lot more sensitive to, we call them like hidden bad gut bugs or hidden
Mm,
stressors in the gut
mm,
that will often show up as a clue on this type of testing versus if you were going to go get like a regular stool test with your regular GI doc, their their threshold isn't as sensitive, right? So they're often not going to pick these things up. And what I can tell you just from my experience is that looking at lots and lots of these tests, I always see clinical correlation between the bad gut bugs that show up on functional stool testing and the client's symptoms as they're coming to me and they're expressing, right?
wow.
So you know that's not just accidental, right? Like it makes sense in the context of what's going on. And then on top of that, it will give a lot of data around what the immune system is doing. Are we seeing a pattern on the test that would really strongly suggest a lot of food sensitivities? What do we see in terms of the balance between the good and the bad bacteria in the gut? Because that's very important too, especially with conditions like IBS and IBD. You know, we really want to take a look at is things can look so different person to person. They could have the exact same symptoms, but then if we run a functional stool test, they could look quite different. And that will really influence the plan that I develop and, you know, guide that client through to help them feel better. So to me, that's like the number one place to start if somebody's really proactive and wants to get to the root and really wants to get some good data on what's going on with their gut.
So, Courtney, somebody comes to you and says, "Look, I feel healthy, but I'm having some discomfort in my stomach, and I'm on a couple medications. I don't think I should be." So, I mean, you've got to create some kind of baseline, correct? So, is it this stool
Yes.
test? Are there others? How do you create the first baseline when you're introduced to a new client?
Yeah, so a couple things. I have all of my clients take what's called a nutrition assessment questionnaire, and it's literally just that. It's just a questionnaire. We don't even get into the testing just yet at that point. And it's a little lengthy, but it's very, very accurate, I found, in giving me a good sort of starting point picture of these different, we call them foundations of health. So we look at the
Mm,
digestive system, we look at, say, sugar handling, we look at fatty acids. I won't go into what those are. I explain those in depth when I go through it with a person, but when I sit down with a client in the beginning, I really do walk them through the highlights of their nutrition assessment questionnaire, and I correlate what I'm seeing on that to the symptoms they're having.
mm.
And then that kind of transitions into, so we've got a pretty good subjective evaluation based on how you're self rating. Now, to confirm these things, I would recommend we go do these two, three, four tests and get the data we need to really fully understand this. And so I use it to help inform my thinking about the whole picture and make sure that when I'm recommending tests, I'm pretty darn sure they're tests that are going to make a lot of sense and get us the data we want. Because person to person, everybody again is presenting very differently. And so how one person shows up might lead me to go think of running, you know, three tests for that person, but then for the next person, I might decide that we have to run a different test out of these three or something,
Hmm.
right? So it is a very kind of personalized process where, you know, I'm using kind of my um, detective skills, if you will, kind of connecting the dots based on all of the data I've gathered from them. They also will do like a very comprehensive health history form that gives me other information besides the nutrition assessment questionnaire. And then, you know, correlating really that data to what's going on with them to what I know the tests will get for me in terms of actually confirming things. And so that's kind of what that process looks like.
Because, I'm inundated. Many people are inundated with all these tests. Take this test for this, take this test for this, and
Yeah,
and sometimes, yeah, I take one or two of them, and it just shows a little bit of the picture and not the full picture. And
right.
of course, general practitioners will just they don't even sell. The new one I have actually asks what I eat, but I mean, I'm 56 years old, and that's like the first time ever. I mean, it's absolutely disgusting. Why aren't they asking what we eat? I mean, how are they going to possibly take care of
No,
us if they don't know what medicine we're putting in our body? Right? Food is medicine.
right.
So how do you disseminate from all these tests kind of FUD that we're getting inundated with?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, um, here's the thing about testing, it's not everything, it's a piece of
Mm.
the process, right? And I explain this to my clients that it helps me get much more clear on the data, which means that I don't have to guess at what's going on and wonder about, do you have, say, overgrowth of bad bacteria or overgrowth of the good bacteria, right? Like I can kind of
Mm.
definitively get that from a good stool test. But the other side of that coin is, yeah, the food that you're eating also is going to play a major role in how well a person responds to whatever protocol I put them on based on the testing, right? And I would almost argue dietary change, especially for people struggling with IBS and IBD, that's got to come before anything, right? Like they've got to be on a nutrient dense, low inflammatory diet, which again is going to look different person to person. And again, everybody's in a different place in terms of their lifestyle factors, ability to be in the kitchen and cook, right? Like this is kind of the more nuanced, personalized one-on-one work that I work through with clients. But that piece is kind of basic foundational, right? Like we have to get that dialed in and solid. And then the testing gives us this extra level of like investigation and clarity on, okay, we don't want you to be stuck on, say, an elimination diet forever if we can avoid it, or at least not as like extensive a one. We want to be able to get you to a place where you can tolerate as many foods as possible because that opens up the ability to go out and eat, easily and socialize and all of the things. And it's that balance. You don't want to put people in these psychologically stressful boxes around diet. And to do that, that's where getting to the root of like, do we have bad gut bugs driving inflammation, which will also drive these food sensitivities? We have to deal with that to get your food tolerance up to a better place, right? So,
Mm.
so there's that component. And then the other thing about testing is there is a delicacy of running too few and too many tests. Like the way
Mm.
that I was trained, we never run just one test in isolation because often it's not enough to get enough of the data points of all the different pieces that can be impacting a person's symptoms, right? And so, like in the gut world, yes, we want to run a functional stool test, but what if this person has major blocks in their ability to detoxify, say, hormones or toxins? Believe it or not, that will also impact gut symptoms, right?
Mm.
What if they have major stress response going on every single day and we miss that, right? Like we can't get all of that data from just a stool test. So that's partly why doing that question and answer kind of investigative piece in the beginning is really helpful because I can glean a lot of those like contextual clues. Like, do I get the sense this person's super stressed? Do I get the sense they've got like a toxic load? Based on these questions I'm asking, and I think that might be a piece of it. That will kind of lead me then to decide what are the couple of tests I might want to run alongside a stool test to fill in the gaps. And there is kind of a order of operations that we like to address these things in functional medicine. And part of the struggle as a clinician is like if we miss something and we go down a path and that client kind of falters or they hit a wall, now we have to go back and often like check this
Mm.
thing we did in the beginning. So it's a delicacy. Like I always tell clients, like my job is to be a good steward of your resources and not throw the kitchen sink at you in terms of
Mm.
testing or supplements or whatever. But at the same time, I want to be confident we've gotten enough data that we've got a good picture of what's going on, and the protocol I develop for you will help get you, over the line. So,
Who won't work? Who will you not work with, Courtney?
who will I not work with? I would say people that are not at least a little bit open minded and
Mm.
at least a little bit ready to change, especially their
Mm.
diet. But I would also say lifestyle as well. So, in functional health, we very much are operating on a, self help model, right? Like we are basically facilitating clients to do self testing and self treatment, if you will, right? Because it's not the same model as like conventional medicine where you're going to see your doctor and like your doctor's kind of in charge in a sense, right? Like this is more of a, I would say, a guided process where I'm the expert, who's giving recommendations and sharing knowledge, and ultimately the client's in the driver's seat and they get to decide, which steps they're going to take with my weigh-in, right? And so where things can get really tricky from a coaching perspective and a behavior change perspective is that, if there is somebody who's presenting like, I really know I need this help and, I want to do this testing, but we get a certain ways in, and now we're talking about options for what we could potentially consider changing diet or lifestyle wise or otherwise. And there's resistance like across the board in that. There isn't a lot of room to really talk about moving, in small steps in a certain direction. That can be really hard because, part of both of our success is dependent upon that client's willingness and desire to actually want to and carry out the ability to make some change. And it doesn't have to be a
Hmm.
major overhaul, but they have to be willing to take some small steps and kind of move a direction. Yeah.
Courtney, you mentioned supplements a moment ago. Where do you stand with that?
Yeah, so I definitely feel like people who really value their health and are proactive about either reversing a chronic illness or staying on top of keeping it in remission if they've gotten there do tend to need some degree of support, whether
Hmm.
that's digestive support to help them digest their food better or a really good nutrient type of repletion support. Say we've discovered that they tend to need higher levels of certain type of vitamin B12, right? Like there's I think the reality is to get the body's needs met solely through diet, even the best of diets can be very hard nowadays.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now, that being said, what I am not a fan of is people on 10 to 15 supplements daily for the rest of their life, right? And I mean,
Hmm.
I've actually had people come in and, start that process of working with me, and they'll bring in, like, kid you not, this huge bag of supplements they've accumulated over the last 6 to 12 months from the local health food store. And they start pulling these bottles out. They're like, well, what do you think about this? And what do you think? And I quickly get overwhelmed and I'm like, okay, this isn't how we're going to work. Like, the point
Hmm.
isn't for me to, like, give you feedback on all these supplements. First of all, we don't even know what you need, right? So I'm not a fan of people just adding and taking all this stuff without a really good reason to do it. Now, if we know that you've got certain genetic mutations that impact your ability to clear toxins through, phase 2 detox pathways, this is a little technical. Sometimes people who have those gene expressions, they do need higher doses of folate and vitamin B12, right? And so
Hmm.
that might be something after we've done the legwork and gotten a person feeling better, they elect to kind of stay on to support that good flow of stuff moving out of the body so they can maintain health, right? Someone with IBS might find they do better lifelong taking digestive enzymes with every meal. And so I have that conversation with clients and I say, truly, it's not likely that you're going to get down to like zero and still feel great. But my goal is to try to keep whatever supportive supplements you take at the bare minimum and make sure that they have the biggest impact for you. And so,
Hmm.
one thing I classically say all the time is I'd much rather you take digestive support like enzymes rather than a multivitamin, because if you're taking a multivitamin and you're not breaking it down, what good is the multivitamin at the end of the day? Much
Hmm.
better that you're taking the enzymes to break your food plus everything else down you're taking than put more supplements down the tank that aren't getting fully broken down. And so we have to kind of think like that at that foundational level and use supplements in a smart, strategic way.
Your brand deserves to be in front of the right audience decision makers, entrepreneurs, and professionals who are ready to take action. That's exactly who listens to the Joey Pinz podcast. Thousands of engaged business leaders and consumers tune in every week. Millions of views and listens across YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Sponsors see real impact, higher engagement, brand trust, and conversations. We offer strategic partnerships tailored to your goals, including targeted ad placements, branded guest appearances, multi-episode and event sponsorships. Make your brand part of the conversation. Let's grow together. Visit joeypins.com/sponsor to explore sponsorship opportunities or email us at sales@joeypins.com. The Joey Pins Podcast, where brands and thought leaders connect. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the problem is that I take few. So I take like, quercetin, for example, and
Yeah,
then I hear, oh, some of the mushroom ones like lion's mane and turkey try. And then eventually, you're right. You start getting to 15 or 20. I said, okay, this is ridiculous
it's a
now. Let's
lot.
get it. Yeah, let's get it down a little bit. And the other thing is many people, they got a headache. they take whatever and it's gone in an hour. That's not how supplements work, right? It's like, well, I
No.
don't feel better today. Why do, so you got to manage expectations there.
You definitely do. You definitely do. And it's interesting you bring this up because I was just having a conversation with a client who I we worked out a protocol. We had done some GI tests, some stool testing on her. We had seen a lot of overgrowth of her body's own beneficial organisms, and that often suggests a condition like small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. And for that we can use supplements strategically to help get rid of that, right?
Mm,
And so that's typically where I'll start. There's different ways you can deal with that, but that tends to be the easiest, least stressful way for most people. And so, I'd written her a protocol, and I don't know if there was just a disconnect in understanding, but to do this holistically with natural supplements, it can take upwards of 6 to 8 weeks. Like it's not a
right,
short process, right?
right.
And from what I recall, I think she maybe stuck with it for a couple of weeks and was like, "This isn't working. I'm not going to do this." And I'm like,
Mm,
"Well,
mm,
of course it's not going to work in 2 to 3 weeks. It's going to take time. You can go to your doctor and get a prescription, and it will clear. It should clear this as well. It'll clear it faster." But then you have to make the choice, like the cost benefit of that, right? Because depending on what they prescribe you, depending on the drug, it could also knock out some of your good bacteria
right,
as well, which
right.
the herbal supplements are not as likely to do. So that's where people have to kind of weigh out
Hmm.
where their values are and make the best choice. Do I want this to take more time or less time? And what am I willing to kind of give up in place of that? So that's 100% true. It's not like an overnight process like a drug where you take it and immediately the symptom goes away, for sure.
Now, Corey, the battle of function medicine practice or function practitioners like yourself is that it's not covered by insurance,
Yeah.
right? People don't really understand it. It's getting better now. I've been able to talk to many of you, and it's definitely getting better. And there's directories where people can find local ones. But uh, what are some of the myths? What are some of the battles that we have to overcome to have people practice in this area?
Yeah, so I think the two biggest objections I get from clients, the biggest one, hands down, or prospective clients, I should say, is the cost objection, right?
Right.
It's like, well, this is too expensive. And, I try to sort of turn that around and say, it is an investment, absolutely, right? Because you're going to now invest your time and energy in resourcing the thousands of hours and life experience and client experience I've had helping people do this to accelerate this for you so you get results faster, right? But the
Mm,
other side of that coin is I'll ask some of these prospective clients, like, how much have you actually invested though? Have you ever looked at that up until the
hmm,
point we sat down and had this conversation? And, a lot of people I find are not necessarily taking all of their co-pays and deductible bills, right? Like all of those kind of like bills that we get after we see the doctor and totaling that up over months and years, as well as then keeping track of how many of the supplements that you've done on your own, right? Like what is the cost of that? And I would argue that that cost that they've invested through those methods first up until that point often is the same if not exceeds the
mm,
investment that I'm putting in front of them to try to put into their health, right? And on the back end, the other side of that coin is if you don't do something about this and we can't get to the root of this, right, and you stay on this path of seeing a doctor and it's just symptom band-aids with drugs, right, and the issue progresses because we're not getting to the root cause, what could be the cost of that, right? And it's not just
hmm,
monetary cost, it's quality of life cost, it's missed opportunity cost, it's potentially career cost, right? Because some of these people are feeling so ill, they're having trouble actually performing in their day-to-day like work as well. And so I think that's sort of the mental flip that people need to get to. And I know I got there personally when I was on that path
mm,
because, of course, in the beginning, your initial instinct is, oh, I can't afford this. This is what my insurance is for. But once you start to understand that the insurance model of medicine is sickness care and it's not set up to endorse and authorize testing that gets to the root cause,
hmm.
it's set up to keep people perpetually taking medications and fund that profit cycle of the pharmaceutical industry. Like, then it's like the light bulb goes off. And you're like, oh, yeah, this probably, if I want the root of this, if I want to go to that level, this is not the right path to get me there, right? So I think that's the biggest thing. And then the time objection is the other one. And it kind of goes back to the thing I originally said, where if you've been struggling with your health for a long time, you really have to kind of ask yourself, like, how much longer am I willing to struggle with this? And, I would argue you're going to invest in time or money either way, whether you make the investment to get help from
Hmm.
someone or not, because most people will continue to make small investments in new supplements they try or DIY approaches or the time that they're wasting. It's kind of like you're going to have a sunk cost either way, and you have to just decide, is this something that you're determined enough to solve that you're going to actually make that out of pocket investment and get that help and accelerate that process to go faster.
Hmm. Yeah, you're investing in yourself. What other investment would be better than that? One has
Right.
to ask themselves.
Right. It's the ROI. Like, what is the ROI on investing in your health? And, a lot of us, I think, if we really think about it, it's like, well, I can't be as good a parent or as good a spouse.
Mm,
I can't be
mm.
as productive at work without a good level of health. It really does impact every other facet of life. Right.
We talked about how medicine is food, Courtney, nutrition. You were a vegetarian for 10 years, I believe. So
Yeah.
how does one decide what's the best nutrition for them?
Yeah, that's such a big question. As much as I would love to give you one perfect answer to that, it's really hard to do. But
Of
I will
course.
tell you that um, this is kind of the nuance of the work of just working with someone who can help you figure that out, right? I think really to answer that question, getting guidance is the best way to go. However, as a starting point, I truly believe that we do need to eat as diverse a diet as possible and foods in their whole food form, right? So foods
Mm,
as close to nature as possible, properly prepared, properly cooked. That's a whole nother area, right? Because in today's world, what does that mean, right? A lot of people aren't cooking at home as much because of time constraints, the busyness of life. You go back to like ancestral cultures, even 100, 200 years ago. If you take like Asian cultures, right, like they will soak rice and rinse it a few times before they cook it. We live in the
wow.
world of minute rice. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of foods that we might recognize as real foods, but then the other question is, are you not tolerating them well or potentially having an inflammatory reaction to them because the way you've been preparing them over time isn't allowing some of the more inflammatory components of the food to break down and kind of get pre-digested, if you will. That's a big kind of like piece of the original training I did as a nutrition therapy practitioner, is just teaching people like, hey, if you're going to eat this food, ideally you're going to want to do XYZ first, right? And so there's a lot to that question, but I think just as a basic answer, trying to get away from foods and wrappers, packaged
Mm.
foods, right? Like that's the best first step. Um, and then from there, it really is, I think, kind of figuring out, okay, what are the foods that are going to work right for your body? And that is just not an easy question to answer, kind of in one specific fell swoop here, right?
That's for sure because yeah, diets work for different people, and if you have celiac or other things you need to eliminate, and
Yeah.
uh, people generally, well, when they want to get healthy, they have this kind of fear of foods, right? Well, I
Yeah.
don't know what this is going to do, so it's after 9, I can't have onions, or I had this one time and I got this reaction, so I'm not going to try it again, and it might have been inorganic, it might have been sprayed, we don't know if that was the actual problem, so you have to kind of keep this testing up, and it's a very difficult process.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really great point, is sometimes it's not the food, it's actually the way it's been prepared or what's
Right.
sprayed on it.
Yes.
And back to your whole point about too, like just the food sensitivity testing. I mean, that's probably another reason why I'm not a huge fan of using that, except for very specific purposes at times, because inevitably you're always going to have something come back. You never get off that bandwagon. And I don't know that it's truly possible to eliminate all food sensitivities, but what you do want to do is identify the biggest problem foods and get those out, and then go to the next level deeper and work on whatever's going on in the gut driving those food sensitivities, so that that noise level comes down, the immune system isn't so activated. If we can just get that down 50% already, we're giving the body a running start to feel better and start to self heal.
Yeah, really, really good point. And in this, especially here in the States, Courtney, I mean, there's like you said, avoid food in wrappers, I mean, but there's just so much bad food that's inexpensive, that's readily available. You're driving down the street and it's there
Yeah.
and it tastes great and it's
Yes.
terrible for you. And you go into the grocery store, you try to, stay on the perimeter, right?
Right.
And not go in. It's all these kinds of things. And you don't have to make major changes, but you're right, why not just kind of subtly, softly make the changes and see how it helps. But we all have friends that have loved ones that have passed, and our health is just so important. It can't be, you can't assume. We were young at one point, so we assume we could just bounce back and, I'm fine. I didn't feel well the next morning, but by noon I was fine. We have to really kind of take stock in our life. It's our biggest investment.
It is. It totally is. And I think the kind of the other thing you're sort of like alluding to with saying all that is the hardest part is people. It's not that they don't know what to do. Foundationally, a lot of
Mm,
people that start working with me, they do already have an idea of what they need to do. It's the behavior change component, right? It's
mm,
how do I actually make this change and consistently do it and do it successfully? And believe it or not, I really truly think the majority of people are wired to need accountability and support and help planning and mapping that out. As simple as it sounds, right? Like there's something about the magic of working with another person who can mirror that back and then
mm,
help you sort out your own roadblocks and, kind of hold you down if you're going a little too crazy with what you want to do and push you when you're not willing to like maybe take that next step. And so I do think this is what's so fascinating about the whole process of holistically regaining your health. It's not just the right testing. It's not just diet change and knowing what to do. It's also literally, I feel you need a like a bona fide health coach to really help
mm,
you like
mm,
map that out and successfully do it because you could do the best test, you could make the best diet change for 2 months, but it doesn't good if there isn't a sustainable process you're going to maintain for the long haul, right? And so many people will make some gains, but then eventually 6 months, 12 months later, they're almost all the way back to where they were. And so something went wrong in that process. Something wasn't um, fully ingrained in that process of trying to get to this health vision that they wanted for themselves.
health vision. Yeah. That's really important. Courtney, has there been anything in the last month or so that you've changed your mind on?
Oh, that's a really good question. Um, Let me think about that. Something I've changed my mind on. I feel like I do change my mind quite a bit. Let me think about that. That's a really good question. Um, hmm. I'm nothing is really coming up. But I'm sure there will be something if I ponder this for a little bit longer. I mean, I've kind of been on a pretty good track for a while with just, well, maybe I'll offer this. I think just as I'm going through my health coaching, like I'm doing this master health coaching certification right now. One thing I have recognized that's been kind of transformational for me is
Hmm.
that all change, we're kind of talking about behavior change, right? All change for it to really be successful does need to be client led. And I think if you were to have this conversation with me maybe 12 months ago, a lot of it would sound the same. But what I didn't recognize back then is that it's more successful to offer clients, like options essentially and give them the education and suggestions, but then take a step back and literally say, ultimately, the choice is yours. And if you have a change you want to put on the table that you feel really passionate about right now, I'm going to do what I can to support that. And let's go with that first. And we don't
Hmm.
have to get into this other stuff I feel you need to do, right? Because I think the thing I'm recognizing as, I go deeper and deeper down this path is like I saw success in a certain way, right, with my own gut health struggle, but some people aren't going to go through those same steps and they'll still get a great result. And other people might have to go through different steps to get the same result. And so I think what's kind of blowing my mind is just realizing that as a practitioner, I've probably already and always have had some biases and some thoughts about, well, first you have to do this, and then you have to do this, and then you have to. And what I'm finding through the coaching certification, because it's such a deep level of training, is that Not necessarily. Like if I can just always keep in mind, like the client actually knows themselves best and they know their body best. And so I always want to work from what they think they need to do first. And if we kind of get stuck and they're just like, gosh, I kind of want to do this, or I'm not sure what to do. What do you think? Well,
Hmm.
okay, here are some options, right? And it's a bit of a dance because sometimes we go down a track of, based on what they might want to do and it doesn't go well, right? And then we can
Hmm.
kind of circle back and be like, okay, that's great. We tried that. We got some good data and information and feedback. This is what we found. Would you like to revisit some of these other ideas? We could maybe try this now. And, this is the reason why this might be a good change to make. And it just always following it with a
Hmm.
lot of education. So now that I think about your question, I think that's probably the biggest thing that's been shifting in me as a practitioner over the last 6 months or so.
There's just not one solution. The iteration is involved.
Yeah, like there's always kind of a dietary framework. It's not super narrow. It is quite broad that I work
Mm.
from that I do generally like to see people kind of foundationally make certain similar shifts in the beginning. But then from there, it can really go different directions. And like I said, some people need a little less change to get the result they're looking for, and others need a lot more. And it's really kind of what following that process out and then helping to guide that client and meet them where they're at. And if they're getting frustrated or they feel like they can't make certain changes, well, then we kind of pause there and we kind of look at what's going on and we try to like reevaluate and adjust what we're doing. So it always feels like it's doable. I would argue behavior change is not easy. We should feel it a little challenged with every step we're trying to take, but there's that balance of not pushing somebody so hard so fast or in a direction they absolutely don't want to go. That's never going to work, right? But if it was totally easy, they probably wouldn't need a coach to help them get there either. So it's kind of finding that balance. And
Hmm.
I think the longer I do this, the more I kind of appreciate um, just how unpredictable it can be. Like it's
Mm.
kind of like the story's unwritten, and then you every client's a little different, and so it keeps me very flexible and like just kind of like, oh, that's interesting, in my thinking as I work with clients. It's actually helping me to grow and maybe just keep my mind as open as I possibly can, or at least a little more open than it was, prior to having these skills as I help people facilitate their own change. Yeah.
So sometimes it could be more art than science.
It can. It definitely can. Yeah. 'Cause like I said, some people come in and I'm amazed at how much they already know. And it's like,
Mm.
okay, like you've got 50% of it. You do need a little help maybe with some of the fine points in education, but mostly what they need is that accountability and that help mapping those steps out and troubleshooting that journey, right? Like just that person to be with them, walking that out and helping them navigate that when, things come up. And a lot of times, it's also just the lifestyles we're all leading. Like we have the best of intentions to get to this outcome that we're shooting for, and we have the roadmap. But I mean, I see this all the time with my clients. Like all these unforeseen events will pop up, right, and then it throws you off, and now it's like you're floundering. And so I think just the real facility of having somebody help you with that journey is you've got that person in your corner helping you kind of navigate that stuff and encouraging you when these challenges come up and say, okay, we're not at ground zero, like we're still making progress here, and let's just pivot, or what if we considered this, right? Like it keeps the motivation a little bit higher, and it helps that client see around their own blind spots, right? Because we all have them when we're trying to do things for ourselves. And I think that's really critical because at the end of the day, none of the information matters, none of the testing matters if that person isn't able to make specific changes they want to make for themselves and then maintain those changes. Like
Mm.
that's really the key. Over time, all of that leads to a healthier outcome, right?
Yeah, really well put. I love your passion towards health. It's wonderful. What motivates you, Courtney?
What motivates me? I think being a mom,
Hmm.
first and foremost. Since I've had my own children, the thought I've had so many times is I don't want them to go through kinds of GI
Mm,
struggles I had. Like
mm.
I don't want them to be the kid curled up on the couch with a pillow under their stomach. And I'm happy to say so far at this point in time, none of my kids do that. So that's a
Good,
win.
good.
Um, but kind of just the track that we're on as a culture does scare me.
Mm,
Um, you know, I don't work deeply in fertility, but I've certainly helped clients that have had fertility struggles. And just one book that came out not long ago that I haven't read it yet, but just the premise kind of scares the heck out of me is, the book Countdown, and talking about how like by the year 2050, um, like the average male sperm count is going to be close to zero if we
wow.
continue down this track, right? And so you think about the implications of that, like being so unhealthy as humans, we're struggling to now actually like reproduce, like that would be the death of us. You know what I mean? At a very foundational level. And so it's not just the actual personal struggle and pain of, having chronic stomach aches and running to the bathroom all the time. I mean, that's like the worst of the worst. And I know that pain and I love helping people because I deeply understand it. But just you think about even deeper issues like people who just can't have children right anymore because they've lost their ability to have healthy reproductive systems and do that right. Like it's really daunting to consider where we might go if we don't collectively, enough of us, start to make these changes. And then of course I look at my kids and I want them to have a healthy future and not have to struggle with things like fertility or chronic inflammation or
Mm,
autoimmune disease. And so I think that's why I'm so thankful that I chose a nutrition focused path, because what I really try to do day in, day out, just within my own home, is model good diet, right? Like model good eating behaviors, eating whole foods. Like our kids have plenty of tasty options and like treats, but they're high quality treats, right? And
mm,
the beauty is like for the most part, they don't know any better. I mean, they do get the junk, right? Every now and again when they're out in the world or at friends' houses, we're not like, militaristic about it, but they're happy to eat what the options are at home. And I truly feel like even my oldest child, he's a teenager, so it's kind of a tricky time when they want to push the limits and they want to have the junk just because, right?
mm,
But
mm,
he'll tell me from time to time, like, I can't even eat birthday cake. It's just too sweet and disgusting, mom, like,
mm,
so I feel good that we've, their palates have kind of like settled at a certain level. And I think if they were to eat really, really crappy food, they would ultimately self adjust. At least that's my hope. And my other hope is that when they become adults, they're going to have this foundation now that's going to feel familiar and always be a place they can go back to and work from. And I think that's where we kind of have to start is, it starts with the food you prep in your home and really modeling to your kids and getting them involved and, letting them help choose and also getting them excited about eating those foods and helping you make those foods. So I think that's what kind of keeps my passion going for this for sure.
mm. So, given that motivation of impact, to family and to others, how do you measure success?
Um, well, I think just looking at my own kids and like sometimes contemplating, like, hey, they aren't getting sick all that often, right?
Mm,
I do have one of the three, for whatever reason, it could just be his wiring. He is more prone to having allergy type things. Like he was my child with eczema and he's got some food allergies. And so the good of that is for my training, I know how to work with those things and work around those things and still give him a sound foundation diet wise and nutrition wise. But yeah, I mean, just kind of I think contemplating what I'm seeing when, for example, like my brothers have kids, and I often will hear like, oh, they're getting sick again. And I'm like, what? Why
uh,
is that happening? Like my kids will get sick, but not that often. Or just kind of looking collectively when we're at places like school events and whatnot and seeing that, other kids sometimes just they're you're seeing a lot of metabolic, issues with younger people nowadays, like overweightedness, right? And I'm happy to say like my kids do not have that problem. They're very high energy. I feel like they wear us out, which is probably a really good sign
hmm,
that their health is there, right? And there's no way to live two parallel timelines and put them on a course of a standard American diet and then put them on the course they've been on, with the way I've, set the stage for them to see how would they be different. But I truly feel like even for myself, I know I'd be struggling to function as well as I can if I was eating the way I used to 15, 20
Mm.
years ago, you know?
Yeah, that, I love talking to functional nutrition practitioners like yourself. It's amazing because you had these issues, you learned how to address it, and then you just didn't keep it to yourself, right? You're showing others. That's the trait of a remarkable person, Courtney. I appreciate your time so much today. Thank you so much. If anybody listening or watching, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so best way is through my website. I've actually got like a bit.ly
Yes.
backslash overcome IBS. It's a free guide that I've developed for people who are struggling with IBS-D and IBD. So if you're in that category and you're looking for a really great starting point that is natural, holistic, and diet based, like that's the resource for you. So there's that. And then I also am on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok at Courtney Cowie NTP.
Looking for a powerful way to reach business leaders and engage consumers? The Joey Pinz podcast connects brands like yours with an audience that listens, engages, and takes action. High impact exposure with a fast growing loyal audience. Millions of views and listens across major platforms. Sponsors see increased brand awareness, trust, and conversations. We make sponsorships simple and effective with custom ad placements that fit your brand, deep audience engagement through authentic conversations, long-term exposure across podcast platforms and social media. Don't miss the opportunity to connect with your ideal customers. Visit joeypins.com/sponsor to secure your sponsorship today. Or you can email us at sales@joeypins.com. The Joey Pins Podcast, where conversations drive results. Courtney, I forgot to ask a really important question. And that is, I started my business in the 90s and I was working way too hard and putting my health in the back. I didn't know anything about functional medicine or functional nutrition at the time. And 14-hour days, Courtney, and I'm in front of the doctor and I'm at 340 pounds.
Oh wow.
And she says to me, if you don't lose this weight, you're not going to see your daughter graduate. So it was, my daughter was just born. What has happened? I'm driving home, punching the steering wheel. What have I done to myself? It's not just me anymore. You mentioned how your kids are your motivation. And,
Yeah.
it's not, I got to take care of myself, not only for me, but for my children too. So I spent the next 6, 7 months. I know you did some triathlons too. And, I lost about 130 pounds in 6, 7 months and it kept it off. You can't look at it as a finishing line, right?
Right.
It's a lifelong changes. Too many people gain all the weight back. So
Yeah.
when I tell this story, I see people in their eyes. What's your secret? What'd you do? And there's no secret, Courtney. Discipline. That's how I did it. I got motivation, I got routine, I got willpower. How does discipline play a role in your life?
Oh, yeah, that's something luckily I've kinda always had it baked in, to be honest with you. I mean, that, but I also feel like because I was a lifelong athlete, like, all the way from a young age. I mean, I remember asking my parents if I could do swim team because I did swimming lessons at the Y, like we all did as kids. We were like Y rats, right? We were always at the Y doing stuff. And so in fifth grade, I started swim team because one of my swimming teachers was like, "Oh, you're a really good swimmer. You should try swim team." And it's like, "Okay, I'll try swim team." And I think it just really fed this high achieving kind of type A nature I have, and I enjoyed just the movement of being in the water. Like even to this day, that's one of my preferred ways to exercise. And so, but it came with a lot of just inbred discipline. Like you
Mm,
do certain sports like that. Like I feel like swim team, cross country. Some of these more endurance focused endeavors, especially because there's just so much training that goes into them. It didn't happen right away, but as I grew older and especially got into like high school swim team, high school sports, and then I did lightweight crew and rowing in college, and that was probably the most disciplined, most intense endeavor I've ever done. I mean, you're up at 4:35 a.m. right to like get the morning practice
yeah.
in, and then gosh, in high school I was so nuts about swim team. I would swim during my like gym hour because we could choose what sport we wanted to do, and then I'd be out there after school, right? Because like most sports are going to have after school practices, and so I just got on this really very predictable, stable rhythm of like, okay, this is now just what I do. And you do that enough and you do it for enough months that become years, right? And it doesn't matter if it's swimming or running or crew or whatever you pick, it starts to become almost a part of who you are. And so,
Mm.
kind of once I was on that path, all the way through my 20s, and this carried through kind of like to your point with having a child and then reaching your heaviest weight, right? Like you're able to, when you have that routine built into you, find a way to carry that through when life changes happen. So even when I had my first son as a single mom, I wasn't as ritualistic or intense about it or have as much time devoted to it, but I never really lost it, right? Like I always was able to maintain some kind of early morning schedule ritual. I'm an early morning person anyhow, so that
Me
just
too.
works for me. But yeah, I mean, I would still have a plan. Like, I'm going to get up in the morning. I'm going to go swim today. I'm going to drop him off and then go do XYZ. And so that is now, I'm so far down that path. It's like baked into me, like you can't really
Mm.
separate it out anymore. And I think kind of that gets back to the behavior change thing we were talking about is that if you've lived most of your life without having discipline, it's not like it's like you're a lost cause, right? Like anybody can develop it. You just need to have a compelling reason to try to make those changes and then a realistic kind of plan to start to get yourself going that direction. And I think that gets back to why behavior change coaching, right? Health coaching is so critical
Mm.
because, like you said, this stuff does take discipline, whether it's diet or exercise or going to bed on time, right? Like you have to be willing to overcome your own compulsions to stay up late and watch TV or be on your phone or eat whatever bad food that's calling to you, right? Like all of those temptations, like you probably still struggle with them. I know I
Yes.
still struggle with them, right? We're just more practiced in how to overcome ourselves in those situations. And so that's like a muscle that you have to exercise and get better and better at. That's just what I've experienced.
You sure do. You've got a great podcast too. You talk to people. It's really cool. I like the way you set that up. Courtney Cowie, Cowie, CourtneyCowie.com. And like you
Yep.
said, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, you're even on TikTok,
Yes.
LinkedIn. And I really appreciate your time. Next time I'm in your area there in the Northwest, perhaps we'll get a cup of tea.
Yeah, that would be so fun. I love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You be well.
You too.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pin's Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pin's Discipline Conversations.